Today, we are going to make our own DIY steam machine, but I don't want to just make a one-for-one copy. Instead, with a bit of ingenuity, I think we can make something that's cheaper, faster, and overall better than what Valve has to offer. Now, that's a bit of a bold statement given that at the time of filming this, Valve still hasn't officially announced the price or specs of the steam machine, but given all the recent leaks, I think we have a pretty good idea of what this thing is going to look like. Rumor has it that the top-end model is going to cost $1,000 US. And when I first read that, I thought, gee, that sounds like a lot of money, and I bet you could build something custom for even less than that. And well, that's basically the genesis of this entire video. So without further ado, let's get started on making our own custom steam machine. The first thing I did was start shopping for parts, and here's where I had my first rude awakening. It's 2026 and everything costs way more than it should. And this is especially true when you're talking about the specialty compact parts that it's gonna take to match the steam machine's form factor. My first attempt was significantly over budget, and that doesn't even account for all the small miscellaneous parts I'm gonna need along the way.
Oh no.
But here's the great thing about buying PC parts. You don't have to shop new. So instead, I turned my attention to the used market where through some expert negotiations, I was able to score some great deals. The only problem was that now I had to go pick everything up. All right, so of course I decided to do this on one of the coldest and snowiest days of the year. This is gonna be a fun trip. So my objective here is pretty straightforward. I need to get the best performance that I can for the least amount of money possible, but with a strict emphasis on gaming. I don't really care how this machine performs when it comes to, say, video editing, because it's supposed to be a steam machine. It's gonna sit in my living room connected to my TV, and that's all it's gonna do. So to that end, maybe I get a slightly older and slightly less powerful CPU, and that gives me a bigger budget to get a more powerful, more modern GPU. So for the next few hours, I drove from location to location, picking up computer parts from complete strangers. Okay, well, not gonna lie, that felt like a little bit of a drug deal. Went into a lobby, gave a guy some cash, and gave me some RAM in a Ziploc baggie. And at first, everything was going great. It was only towards the end of my trip, when I stopped for a little pick-me-up, that things took a turn for the worse. Oh, damn it. My motherboard guy just canceled on me. I must have sold it to somebody else. Okay, well, let's see what we can do about that. Thankfully, there's more than one way to score deals on computer parts. Okay, so I managed to find this at a local retailer. It's not used, but it's an open box return. So it cost me like $10 more, but maybe I have a warranty now. So with all of my parts secured, I headed back home to get started on some of the fun stuff. Oh boy, guys, I got all of the parts here, and already I'm starting to get very excited for this build. Now, I'm not great at mental math, so I'm gonna edit in a quick update to our budget here. This is what we have currently spent so far, and this is the theoretical cost of a new steam machine. So I suspect at this point, we're at least a couple of $100 under budget, which is a good thing, because if you look at all of these parts all laid out, you can see that we're missing a very key piece of the puzzle. We still don't have a case. And to make matters worse, even if I wanted to buy something, there's nothing commercially available that looks even remotely close to the steam machine. So I think what we're gonna have to do is build our own case. And to kick off the process, I'm gonna do something that seemed to annoy a lot of people in one of my other videos. I 3D scanned all the parts to aid in designing the new case. And look, I get it. A decent 3D scanner starts at like $500, which is a lot of money. But a tool like this saves me so much time compared to hand measuring everything, plus the results are way more accurate. That level of detail allows me to skip multiple rounds of prototyping and go right to big parts like this one, which is functionally half of our new case. Now, don't mind the weird color scheme, I'm just burning through some leftover filament, but this first print is very important. It brings our digital design into the real world and allows us to check stuff like that our screw holes line up and that all of our parts actually fit. And speaking of parts, let's talk about the hardware. First, we have this B550 Micro ITX motherboard. This is the smallest platform you can get that still allows you to run full-size desktop parts. And that's important because it means we'll have a much larger power budget compared to the mobile hardware that's being used in the Steam machine. But there's a bit of a catch, because this platform isn't exactly cutting edge. And while that did allow me to keep costs down, it makes my next choice a bit of a gamble. This Ryzen 5600X is quite a bit older than what Valve is going to be using, so when we do our performance testing later, it could end up being a bottleneck. Next, I installed a Gen 3 2TB NVMe drive. This will give us a ton of storage for games, plus its real-world loading speeds should be indistinguishable from the Gen 4 drive that's likely to be used in the Steam machine. Now, hopefully, by the time you're watching this, the current DDR5 RAM shortage is a distant memory, but as of filming, DDR4 RAM is about 80% cheaper, and the performance difference between the two is pretty negligible. So this 16GB kit should match the Steam machine in terms of capacity without blowing our budget. And then, because we're trying to keep this build as compact as possible, there wasn't room for a full-size cooler. But don't let this little guy fool you. What it lacks in size, it makes up for in efficient design. Plus, I've got a little mod plan for it that should help it to perform even better. And that brings me nicely to where I spent almost half the budget. This is AMD's RX 9060 XT. And yes, I know I could have picked something older with a better price to performance ratio, but this thing is tiny at only 200mm long, it's extremely efficient, and it has access to all the latest upscaling tech. Across the board, this thing is a huge step up from what you'll get in the Steam machine, and I'm betting the ranch that it'll pick up any slack left over from our older components. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, let's just see how I did with the prototype. Oh man, look at how good this thing looks. There are a few small things that I'm gonna change here and there, but overall, I am really happy with how this first prototype turned out. And to be honest, the whole thing feels really solid too. The rigidity and strength of the computer parts themselves are actually enhancing the overall strength of the case. But many of you guys are probably noticing that we are still missing a key part of any good computer build, and that is the PSU. So let's talk about how we're gonna incorporate this thing into our Steam machine. Many ITX computers will put the PSU out here, which is fine, but for us, it would increase the overall length of the case and really get away from the cube-shaped aesthetic of the Steam machine. So what I really wanna do is take the PSU and put it here like so. But I'm not just gonna hang it off the back of the case because, well, this is just a thin piece of plastic. So the PSU is actually gonna be supported by the next piece of the case. And for all intents and purposes, you can think of this next piece as just the rest of the case. In addition to holding our PSU, it's also going to be most of the outside walls. And while our first prototype was pretty seamless, the second one is a great example of why just because something works in a CAD model, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in real life. This small lip on the backside prevented the PSU from sliding into its cage. Now, thankfully, this was relatively easy to correct temporarily, but this is exactly why I make prototypes and I don't just jump straight to the final design. This process always involves a bit of trial and error, so don't get too discouraged if a part you're working on doesn't work on the first try. And on the subject of things not working, there was another small clearance issue with the PSU, but after I got that sorted, I was able to screw the two halves together and take a second to appreciate just how far we've already come. Would you look at that? So I know there were a few small little hitches with the initial assembly, and I'm definitely gonna have to change a few things here and there, but overall, I am really happy with how this is looking. Now, I'm gonna explain what these cutouts are for in the case a little bit later, but before we get to that, I wanna start making the front panel because the Steam machine has some really cool features that I wanna replicate on this build, but doing it is gonna be a little bit complicated. From setting the leaks, I knew there were 4 key features that I had to include. But before I could work on those, first I needed somewhere to put them. So that's what we're printing here. This modular front panel bolts directly to the front of the case and will hold all of our new accessories. And now that it's in place, we can start working through all of our features from easiest to hardest. First, we've got the front USB 3 port, perfect for easily connecting peripherals. I found this cable on Amazon for like 20 bucks and it screws in place like so. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything that also came with a micro SD card slot, but given all of the extra ports on the back of our machine, I'm not really too worried about it. Next, we've got the power switch. Installing it was as easy as dropping this ring into the front of the case and then tightening it down. But if you look at it, it doesn't really look anything like the Steam machine, so I also printed this extension for it. And yes, I know these colors are horrible right now. We are gonna fix that, but first, I wanted to replicate the Steam machine's cool LED light bar. And this was a lot harder than I initially anticipated. You can just buy LED light bars, but much to my dismay, I couldn't find anything that fit the case's opening. So instead, I got this RGB strip light, which is also too long for this application. Now, some LED lights can be trimmed, but this one lacked any sort of documentation, so I held my breath, cut it to length, and prayed that it would still work. Which, thankfully, it did. Hey, it still works. But looking at it, you can see that it still doesn't look anything like a light bar. We're gonna fix that, but first, I wanna play with some magnets. Rumor has it that the Steam Machine is gonna have interchangeable faceplates, and I think that that is a pretty neat idea. So I added a series of magnets to the front frame, and then printed a prototype faceplate, which also has corresponding slots for magnets. Polarity is important here, so before I installed them, I marked each pair with a Sharpie, and then after pressing them into place, I was ready to act like a kid for a minute. All right, let's give it a shot and see how she does. Oh, that is so satisfying. Who doesn't love a good magnet? Oh, I love that. Oh, I can do that all day long. So now that that's working, let's get back to the light bar because we need to talk about diffusion. See, LEDs by their nature are very small and very bright. So we need to find a way to spread their light over a wider surface area. But getting it right was gonna require some experimentation, so for pretty much an entire day, I printed out different versions of a light bar. They all had the same external dimensions, but I tried both different materials and also different internal fill patterns. Those variables affect how the light is bounced around inside the bar before you actually see it. Some were too dim, some weren't diffuse enough, but eventually I found the Goldilocks bar. Clear polycarbonate plastic with a honeycomb infill pattern looked really good, even if it's not the right color yet. Oh man, I am starting to get really excited about the way this thing looks. Or maybe I should say the way that it will look, because right now I do realize that it's just a bunch of different color plastics, and trust me, we are gonna fix that. But before we do, if I remove this front panel, you can see that the CPU's fan is really crowded. It's basically just pulling in hot air off the backside of the GPU and the PSU, which is gonna be really bad for performance. So before we focus on making this thing look good, I think we have one last technical hurdle left to overcome. And speaking of technical hurdles, my inbox is flooded with people asking me, how can I learn to do what you do in your videos? And until now, I haven't really had a good answer. That's why I decided to create the Modders Masterclass. It's a 3-part video series that teaches you everything you need to know about working on electronics. We'll cover everything from disassembly and DC circuits straight through to micro soldering. All taught through hands-on projects where we rebuild a Game Boy Color, an N64, and even an original Xbox. By the time you're done, you'll be able to repair, modify, and even upgrade all of your favorite electronics. Now, the full release is coming soon, but I have a pre-registration page that's up right now. Anyone who signs up will be notified the second the course goes live, and you'll lock in a massive 50% early bird discount. So, to secure your spot, scan the QR code on screen right now, or check out the link in the video description. And now, let's get back to the Steam Machine because we still have a lot of work left to do. To keep our power-hungry desktop CPU operating at peak performance, I think it's gonna need a snorkel. Using our 3D scans from earlier, I designed this intake plenum that will prevent our cooler from sucking up all that warm air. This guy bolts right to the top of the fan and keeps it fed with the coldest possible air from outside the case. And as you can see, I wanted to give it as much airflow as possible, so not only does it pull from the rear of the case, but it also pulls from the side. Now, I know my alignment here isn't perfect, but don't worry, because we're gonna fix that right now by reprinting the entire case. And to do that, we're gonna use my favorite material for making computer parts. Good old glass fiber reinforced ABS. This stuff is a great mix between strength, heat resistance, and just being really dang easy to print. In addition to fixing that alignment issue, I made a whole bunch of small tweaks to make the case stronger, easier to assemble, and just overall better. So if you want to print your own DIY Steam Machine at home, just scan the QR code on screen right now, or check out the link down in the video description. Now, to be honest, I could have just left these parts as is because they do look pretty sweet, but I think you guys will agree they don't quite match the look of the Steam Machine. So let's head over to the shop where we're gonna fix that, and also we'll talk about how the budget of this project got away from me a little bit. To remove the fuzzy texture of my glass fiber ABS, I kick things off by giving everything a good rough sanding. This also has the benefit of knocking down any high points in the layer lines and promotes good adhesion during our next step, which is spraying on automotive filler primer. This high building paint works great to fill in the valleys of the layer lines, but it isn't the cheapest stuff in the world. And frankly, the healthy budget that I had left over after buying all the hardware was starting to look a bit anemic. We'll do a full cost comparison later where I factor in everything that I spent on this project, but for now, after multiple rounds of filler primer, I was ready for the top coat. And here, surprise, surprise, I'm using matte black spray paint. But you need to be careful with this stuff because it is really easy to ruin the matte texture by spraying on too much paint all at once. If you want this stuff to actually look matte, you're much better off spraying on multiple thin coats rather than one or two heavy ones. So, while I waited for the spray paint to dry, I decided to replicate yet another feature from the Steam Machine. Except this one, I'm gonna do way better. Over on my CNC, I loaded in a small piece of walnut and started cutting it into a front panel. See, a lot of leaked photos of the Steam Machine show it wearing something very similar. Except their version is pretty clearly just cheap plastic that's printed to look like walnut. We're gonna do real hardwood. After I planed it down to the perfect thickness using my drum sander, I fed it back into my CNC for a little bit of self-indulgent branding. A dash of black ink helps to make my logo pop, and then after quick sanding, I sealed the wood using a hard wax oil. And now, I think we're finally ready to start putting this thing together. All right, well these all turned out much better than I initially anticipated. Compared to all the leaked photos that I've seen of the Steam Machine, I think these are a really good match in terms of both color and texture. Now, I'm sure many of you guys will disagree with me and feel free to do so down in the comments, but at this point, I think we should start addressing all of these cutouts in the main case. I'm sure many of you have already figured this out, but all of those openings are either intakes or exhaust. So to prevent our Steam Machine from getting all nasty, we're gonna need to install some dust filters. As you can imagine, these filters need to be sized pretty precisely to fit inside of our case. So to make my life as easy as possible, I printed out a series of cutting templates. All I had to do was trace each one with a knife and then bend the mesh material until it snapped. The filters themselves go into these recessed openings and get secured in place with a bit of rapid setting super glue. Just like with the CPU, these cutouts are positioned so that all of my parts can suck in cool air from outside and then exhaust it where it won't interfere with any other components. My hope is that this design will give us even more of a performance edge over the official Steam Machine. So with that done, I started putting it all together just like I did before. The only small changes I made were that I secured all the magnets in place with a drop of glue, I permanently installed that extender on the power switch so that it looks more like the Steam Machine, and I also installed a set of soft TPU feet so the case won't slide around on hard surfaces. Now, just to be sure, I did test fit the black front panel, but let's be real, you guys knew that I was always going to choose walnut. So physically, our new Steam Machine is now complete, and I love the way it looks, especially with this walnut front panel. But I'm sure many of you guys know that hardware is only half the battle. I could just slap Windows 11 on this thing and call it a day, but part of the magic of the Steam Machine is that it runs SteamOS, Valve's tailor-made operating system that's designed to turn your average PC into the ultimate couch gaming setup. So I think our next challenge is going to be trying to get SteamOS to run on this thing. Unfortunately, this was one of those things that turned out to be way harder than I initially thought. See, Valve makes SteamOS available for people to download with the caveat that it's meant primarily for mobile systems like the Steam Deck. And that's actually a big part of the reason that I chose all AMD parts for this build. The Steam Deck uses AMD hardware, so my hope was that if I did the same thing, it would ensure compatibility. But much to my dismay, that was not the case. SteamOS would install just fine, but then when I went to run it, all I would get is this black screen. Oh, come on. Long story short, it turns out that my graphics card is too new for SteamOS. Luckily, I still had a glimmer of hope because I found out you can get beta versions of SteamOS with wider hardware support. So I got my hopes up, installed a beta version, and it actually booted. Hey, all right. However, I quickly ran into another roadblock because no matter what I did, I kept getting this error. Ah, come on. So again, I went in search of a solution, and that's when I found Bazzite. Basically, Bazzite is a special version of Linux that's designed to look and function almost exactly like SteamOS. The big difference is that it has wider support for hardware and allows for a bit more customization. After running through its installation process, I stared at a black screen for so long that I almost lost all hope again. Come on, not again. But then, finally, it booted. And you know what? If I didn't know any better, I would tell you that this is SteamOS. It boots directly into this cool front end where I have access to all of my games, and then if I want, I can kick over into a desktop environment and mess around with all sorts of fun settings. In fact, I can even fix something that's been bothering me for a while now. There we go. Now this thing really looks like a Steam machine. So before we get into an in-depth comparison, there's actually one last piece of the puzzle, which I forgot until I went to use this thing for the first time and realized that I don't have a controller. The Steam machine is gonna come bundled with one, so I ran out and got this 8BitDo Ultimate 2 wireless for 40 bucks. This thing is a fan favorite with PC gamers. It's got lots of extra buttons, tons of customizable features, and it even comes with its own wireless 2.4 gigahertz dongle for super low input latency. And now that we're talking about input latency, we might as well get right into our first major comparison category: performance. I played Arc Raiders, Spider-Man 2, and good old Cyberbench 2077, and what I found is really surprising. All of those titles easily achieved 60 FPS at 4K with a mix of medium and high settings, with the major caveat that I was running AMD's FSR upscaling technology. Now, I know a lot of people love to poo-poo FSR and DLSS, but a big reason that I picked the 9060 XT is because it has access to FSR4, which looks a lot better than previous generations. Heck, with frame generation enabled, you can get well over 100 FPS at 4K. And thanks to our specially designed case, I even managed to eke out a little bit of extra performance by overclocking the system. Now, obviously I can't do a direct in-game comparison because the Steam machine isn't out yet, but what I do know is that my GPU is over twice as powerful in terms of raw performance. And I haven't found a game yet where my CPU is the bottleneck. So I feel pretty confident in saying that my system will outperform the official Steam machine by anywhere from 50 to 100%. Which is great because it didn't end up being nearly as cheap as I thought it would be. So let's break down our second comparison category: cost. When you factor everything in, I spent 1,300 Canadian dollars, which translates to approximately 950 USD. The case itself was close to 150 once you factor in paint, filament, and all of the small parts. But I did still save like 100 bucks in sales tax. So I'm gonna give myself a slight edge in the cost department. Next, let's talk about size. Undeniably, the official Steam machine is smaller. It's 50 millimeters thinner and 50 millimeters less deep. Whether or not that matters to you is kind of subjective, but I suspect you could fit this thing just about anywhere where you'd want to put a Steam machine. Another area where the Steam machine takes the W is the convenience category. You're essentially paying Valve to work out all the headaches for you. No sourcing parts, no creating installation media, no tweaking settings, just plug it in and it's gonna work straight out of the box with warranty. And as someone who just spent a couple of days setting this thing up, that does sound pretty nice. But the flip side to that is that the official Steam machine loses in our next category, which is customizability. With a machine like this one, I can run whatever software I want, I can overclock my parts, I can run different operating systems, I can even change the animation of my LED light bar. So if you're like me and you enjoy tinkering, that's a real value. And along similar lines, my system is a shoe-in to win the category of upgradability. Valve has said that you can swap the RAM and the storage on the Steam machine, but literally every single part on my PC is fully upgradable. The only limitation is size and maybe power consumption, which unfortunately is a category where my machine falls short. The Steam machine is expected to use 110 watts of power thanks to its aforementioned mobile hardware, whereas my machine uses about 300 when the throttle is wide open. Now, that extra power is being put to good use, delivering more performance, but it will be a little bit more expensive to run. And then for our final category, we have ports and I/O. This one is kind of a mixed bag. The Steam machine is newer, so you get things like Wi-Fi 6E and instead of just Wi-Fi 6, but my machine has a way faster Ethernet port. And then the Steam Machine has that micro SD card slot, but my machine has twice as many USB ports and a whole other M.2 slot for upgrading storage. Personally, I would rather have my system, but depending on your use case, you might disagree. And really, I think that conclusion is emblematic of this whole comparison in general. I love my knockoff Steam Machine. To me, it's way better than the official one could ever hope to be, primarily because it offers way more performance for slightly less money. There are some drawbacks to be sure, but for me and how I'm gonna use this thing, they don't really matter. That being said, I would love to hear from you guys. What do you think? Would you rather have one of these or the official Steam Machine? Oh, and before I forget, channel members are gonna get access to a special bonus video where I dissect all the different ways that I think I could have made this project even better. So check that out if you're interested, and if not, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.